In this Marvel Midnight Suns video, we're going to be taking a look at Hunter, who is the main character of the game, all the different abilities that you can use with this character, and this is sort of going to be like a longer video because there are just far more abilities with Hunter than any of the other characters in the game. So we're going to go through those and what passives that you want to take or take a look at taking if you're going to play the way that we're set up. We're also going to be taking a look at some of the other cards that we're not using in our deck and look at why you may or may not use them if you're looking to make a Hunter build. So first, let's take a look at the passive I'm using. I'm using Fully Charged here. This is one of the ones you get very early on in the game and essentially gives you resist or gives you a heroism at the start of every turn. Both of these are phenomenal. Resist prevents the first damage, all the damage from the first attack you take on the enemy turn, and heroism obviously is used to use heroic abilities, and anyone in your group can use that. It's similar to Doctor Strange's ability, which also grants heroism, but it has a random, choice between resist and generates heroism at the beginning of every turn. This is really, really good. You use both of these all the time. When we talk about the collar I'm using here, I'm using the balanced collar, and that's because you get to draw 2 Hunter cards every time you play 3 Hunter cards. Whenever you're playing a Hunter, no matter what style you're using, no matter what cards you're using, you're always playing Hunter cards, so you're just naturally going to gain extra Hunter cards throughout the mission as you play these cards. And you don't have to do anything crazy, you don't have to put together some combination of cards like you do with some of the other collars. And because we're using Wrath, which grants critical strike, another one of the collars isn't that important. So Balanced Collar is really, really good here, and because Wrath's free the way we have it set up, or it's upgraded, you can play cards very, very quickly. You can do something like Wrath, Quick Slash, and then one other card, and you have, boom, 2 hero cards for Hunter. It works really, really fast, and you can generate this several times throughout a mission. Which collar you're going to use is obviously dependent a little bit about where you are in the game and how much light and dark balance you have. I haven't unlocked all the dark balance colors, so I'm not sure what all their abilities are, but the balanced color is obviously somewhere in the middle. You're going to get this, I think, either way that you go, so this is a good choice. And it makes it so that you can make whatever decisions you want in terms of light and dark, and you're still going to get this anyway. Next, let's talk a little bit about the cards that I like to use. The first one that I think anyone should use, no matter what you're playing the Hunter as, is Quick Slash, particularly early on in the game. It's one of very few abilities in the game that does knockback, is quick, and also deals damage. A lot of spells or cards in the game, like from Doctor Strange, from Magic, from Spider-Man, will knock back, but they won't also deal damage. This one does both, and that can be a huge. In some cases, it'll allow you to kill enemies when there's nothing to knock them back into, or it'll allow you to knock an enemy that's a stronger enemy than a minion into something and kill it and still get that card play back from quick. So it's a really, really strong ability, particularly early on, and you're definitely going to want 1 or 2 of those in your deck pretty much the whole game. Next up, we have Wild Strike. This is a seriously damaging ability that's just a regular attack card that generates a little bit of heroism, but it does extremely high damage for not being a heroic card or using any heroism. And the downside is that it makes you vulnerable for 1 turn, but if you have the resist on you from your passive, then you won't take any damage when you get hit anyway. And a lot of times you're going to have a tank in your group who can taunt targets so that you don't get hit. The idea with this ability is 1 swing, 1 kill. So you're going to want to take out a deadlier target with this ability, not a minion or something like that, and try and remove 1 deadlier enemy from the board. So when you're modifying it, you absolutely want to modify it to increase your damage somehow, whether it's against full targets, whether it's the damage of the ability as itself. But either way, it's going to want to be some sort of damage increase so that you can kill 1 difficult to kill enemy in 1 swing. Next, we're going to take a look at Wrath. This is an ability, once you've upgraded, becomes free. It makes all of the Hunter cards in your hand critical, meaning their damage is going to increase by whatever your critical damage multiplier is. This will increase throughout the game as you do like little side objectives and things. And it'll make all the Hunter cards you draw for the next 2 turns have critical as well. And another really great thing about this is you can modify it. We've modified it here to draw the last attack card played, so this will be from whatever character. But let's say you used Wild Strike and then you got this somehow like the next turn, you could cast it and then pull Wild Strike back into your hand, and now it would be a critical version of Wild Strike, which is fantastic. And another really good thing about this, as I mentioned, is that it's free, and that'll get you towards those 3 cards played for the Hunter in order to get 2 card draws for a Hunter cards as well. So that's really good. So there's no reason not to play this. It's going to give you critical on every Hunter card in your hand for the next 2 turns. You'll pull an attack back. Literally play this every time it's in your hand in order to get closer to that 3 Hunter cards played. The next card I want to take a look at is Patience. This is a heroic ability. It's extremely expensive at 6 heroism, arguably one of the most expensive heroic abilities in the game. Deals incredibly high damage, and you can only cast it 1 time, and then it gets removed from your deck for that mission. So you might be wondering, why would you use it? Well, the reason is because the cost of it goes down every turn that it remains in your hand. And obviously, if it's been upgraded with Wrath to deal critical damage, then it's going to deal even more damage. And if you get strengthened or something like that, this thing can hit for over 1,000 damage extremely easily. And that's going to one-shot pretty much any boss or any difficult enemy on the battlefield. So you can use this to just absolutely wipe out very, very tough to kill enemies in one swing before they can, like, buff or counterattack or any, mechanics that they might do after you hit them. They'll never get to trigger because they'll already be dead. So this is a really, really good card to have, and because we have 2 of them here, you can use it on 2 different targets, just absolutely remove them from the board and just deletes them from the ignition. And lastly, a card that I like to kind of sneak in here depending on who I'm running with is Deadly Ground. What this does once it's upgraded is it summons 1 light and 1 dark explosion, and then it'll summon another light and dark explosion. These are just like interactable explosions on the map that you can, use 1 heroism to activate, or you can knock back enemies into them, or you can detonate them with Scarlet Witch. And you gain some heroism, and we also have it here modified so that we gain a hero card. So we can cast it, gain another hero card, which helps us get to that 3 Hunter hero cards played for that theme that we're kind of going for. This card is only really good depending on who you have. If you have like Magic, who's constantly knocking people through portals into explosions, this works really well, particularly because the explosions created by this get benefits if things are knocked into them, like it'll make things vulnerable or it'll make things stunned, but they have to be knocked into it. So Magic is really good. Spider-Man is really good for this. He does a lot of knockback as well. And then obviously Scarlet Witch, because if she doesn't have anything to detonate, her detonate ability is wasted. This gives her a whole bunch of things she can use detonate on. Okay, cards I don't use for this build. First, let's take a look at Mindbender. This is a dark card that seems really good at first glance. It makes an enemy target and attack its nearest ally twice, and it gives you a good amount of heroism, and then it's exhausted. This would seem great, but generally speaking, you can deal more damage with your own heroic attacks or your own attacks as Wild Strike will out-damage this by itself. A lot of your attacks will outperform this, and a lot of other heroes' attacks will outperform the skill in terms of overall damage, so I don't advise using this one. Taking a look at Morningstar, this is an interesting one where it's an attack that deals a little bit of damage, not much, and then every time you play a Morningstar card, so theoretically you'd have 2 of them and you keep drawing them and keep playing them, it would deal more and more damage each cast. I find abilities that work this way, like Chain Strike or things like that from Ghost Rider and Chain Bolt from Scarlet Witch, these abilities work similarly. I find that these abilities never last long enough to get charged up enough to be worth it, so I don't recommend using that one. Whip is a heroic card that does really good damage early on because it deals damage and forcibly knocks back for 1 heroism, which is fantastic. However, it makes you discard a random card, so this is better at the beginning of the game when your decks aren't optimized, and it can make you discard a crappy card, and it's just better than some cards. But as you optimize your deck more and more, it becomes less and less of a good skill. Holy Burst looks really good at first glance, but the damage that it deals for an AoE is quite small, and generally your characters are not piled up together, and they don't all need to be healed at the same time. So it seems a lot better on paper than it actually is in practice, so I don't recommend that one. Mindbreaker is actually a really strong heroic card if used against bosses because it effectively makes them attack their allies for several rounds. But this is only particularly good in boss fights. Like if you're not fighting any like the supervillains, etc., you don't really need this card. You'd be better off killing a target than using this. Supervillains are a lot harder to kill generally, so this is a much better card when you're facing them, and you might want to bring these along when you know you're going to be facing one, but I wouldn't recommend it in any other scenario. Summon Charlie is an interesting card because in order to get the most out of it, you have to like become very, very friendly with the dog throughout the game in order to upgrade the abilities of the dog that'll get stronger and stronger. Otherwise, this just isn't that good because the abilities that Charlie plays, besides the one that marks everything, which is really strong, don't deal very much damage when they're not upgraded. So in order for this to be good, you actually need to change the like kind of outfit or the passive that you're using to benefit him. And also you need to spend a lot of time like hanging out with the dog and petting the dog and stuff to make this better. So unless you're doing those things, you're probably not going to use this ability. Call to Arms is a lot better later in the game than it is early on because later in the game you start getting heroic abilities that cost 5, 6, 7, 8 or as much heroism as you have or you can get. So this is much better then. Early on in the game your heroic abilities are between like 1 and 4 usually, and you can generate a lot of heroism from like 1 card. You can generate 4 heroism usually. So you don't normally need it early on in the game, and it definitely gets better later on in the game. We don't have a place for it in our deck unless you pull out one of our attacks. You could replace Deadly Ground with it if you want. It's also free, which is nice, but I don't have it in here. But if you're playing with characters that don't use the environment at all, then you might want to replace Deadly Ground with that. Besides that, there are a lot of healing abilities, and I just find that healing by itself is a waste of a card play usually. Unless you're maybe playing on harder difficulties, but if you're playing on the easier difficulties of the game, you're not going to heal much. Even if your character gets KO'd, you can pick them up for free if you have the heroism. So it's not such a big deal if a character goes down, and you'd be better off attacking most of the time, or finding an ability like the one that Nico has that heals while attacking, so you don't waste that card play just healing. Also, you can modify that card in order to be quick as well, so that way you get a heal and damage, and if you kill the target, then you get that card play back, which is great. So obviously the Hunter character is going to play with a lot of different heroes throughout the game based on the missions, because he's involved or she's involved in all of the, pretty much all of the main story missions. So you're going to be playing this character a lot, and how they synergize with different characters is obviously going to depend on what cards you have, like Deadly Ground, for instance. I've already made a case why that works with certain ones. But if you do have heal abilities in your thing, that works really well with Ghost Rider and Wolverine are both really need healing. So healing abilities work better with them if you do want to use them. I don't recommend them, but if you do, there's better synergy with those two characters for healing abilities than there are with others, for instance. So that wraps up our Hunter build video. I hope that answered some questions you have, but if you have any more, please leave them in the comments. And if you have other tips for other players, things I missed, leave those as well. It's always good to help people out. And if you want to see the challenge puzzle, how to solve it so you can get your legendary ability, that will be right after this. Spoiler alert for that. If you don't want to watch it, don't do it.